So we've all heard the 23rd Psalm many times in our lives. We've probably said it many times in our lives, but have we ever really stopped and considered it? What does it mean? Some of us have to an extent. I remember for the longest time I couldn't get over the first line. It's like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's like, what? Why would I not want the Lord? You know, I wasn't paying attention to the punctuation. But we've all thought about it a little bit. Today we're going to talk a little bit further about it. And this is inspired by deeper consideration and a study that Andy and I are doing. And I told him the other day I was going to do it. So anyway, what we do know about the 23rd Psalms is that it is one of the most beautifully inspirational writings of history. Even if you don't have a religious bone in your body, even if you don't want to believe in God, this is a beautiful writing. The psalm is an example of the feelings of contentment and assurance that David must have felt when he was considering his relationship with God. These words don't come from somebody who's kind of trying to figure it out. These words don't come from somebody who thinks it might be this way, but maybe not. He's not trying to talk himself into this understanding. He has already experienced this understanding. And to have this, you've got to have security, peace, contentment within you around that consideration, around that relationship. And that David had. So we're going to break this down line by line and talk a little bit more about what each line means to help us find that contentment, find that assurance, to hold tightly to truth. So the Lord is my shepherd, semicolon, so I always forgot that growing up, semicolon, I shall not want. This is David realizing that God is to him what he is to his flock. Because David was just a little shepherd boy out there taking care of sheep. And his job was to make sure those sheep never wanted for anything. Because if they did, they didn't grow, they didn't mature, they didn't do all that they were supposed to do to provide later on. So his job was to make sure that they were cared for. And he had to do so lovingly and kindly. Because to cause stress injures not only the sheep, but stress in our life is the main cause of disease in our bodies. God is the same to us as that shepherd is to the flock. He cares for us lovingly and kindly. He leads us to places of prosperity, of abundance. The shepherd leads his flock to places where they can eat, where they can drink. Now, he can't make them eat and drink, but he leads them to those places, and that's exactly what God does when we pay attention. Even if we don't pay attention, we're still being led somewhere. And it might be a rough road if we're not paying attention. But we're led to places we still have to choose to accept. But God's job is to lead us, to guide us, and to do so lovingly and kindly. When we realize God is our shepherd, we need not worry. We know that we're never alone. He never wanders off from us. Sometimes we try to wander off from him. But we're never successful. We're never alone. God is our comforter and our provider. And when we release our need to be in control, we realize that guidance. A popular phrase that comes to mind that I think Cecilia uses quite often is let go and let God. Let go of all your worries, all your troubles, and just tune in to what's happening around you. That's what it means. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters is the next line. This phrase speaks to the abundance that we will experience when putting our trust in God. We will be led to a place that is so abundant that we can lie down not only all of our worries and all of our stresses, but we can lie down and relax mentally, physically, emotionally. The green pastures speak to all of our needs being met, and our only need, our only requirement is to allow and to receive. We try to make it much harder with, okay, well, here's this great green pasture where everything I ever wanted is here. I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do that. And we make this list of what we've got to do to earn that, to be worthy of that, to get that, all we have to do is receive. God hasn't put any stipulations on it. None. We just have to be open and we have to receive. The still waters refer to what was called at one time the river of life. And this is where there is no conflict and no turmoil. It is absolute peace. Absolute peace. When there is no conflict or no turmoil, there is no worry. There is no scarcity. There is no fear. So imagine, well, I'll tell you, in a seminar that I used to attend and then eventually taught was, we did a visualization where we went to our sanctuary. And the sanctuary was that place of absolute peace, absolute comfort, absolute oneness. And in every one of my visualizations that I did myself, I had that green pasture and those still waters. And I don't know that I was relating it to this, probably was in some way, but that green pasture to me is total tranquility, and those still waters are nourishment and quiet and peace and solitude, and it's just a utopia for me. And so I think that might be why I think this psalm is so beautiful. The next line in the psalm is, He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. He restoreth my soul is not to mean that something is wrong with your soul. If you come to this looking for a healing of your soul, don't waste your time, because your soul is absolutely perfect. It doesn't get tarnished. It doesn't get damaged. It can never be harmed. Your soul is perfect. What this means is restoration of your understanding of soul. Restoration of your knowing and your perception of soul. Your soul. That part of you that is absolutely one. We can release all of our cares and all of our concerns for yesterday and all of our burdens when this restoration happens, when this awakening, would probably be even a better word, happens. Because the soul is already intact, already full, already complete, and it is our awareness when we let go of all of those burdens and all of the problems of yesterday and all of the cares and concerns for yesterday, when we let go of all of that, we come into this present moment, and that is where we realize our soul is absolutely perfect. It's in the right here, the right now. The soul cannot be restored or understood by holding on to the past. We've got to let it all go. When we do that, that awareness and that perception is made new again. Because at one time, we knew exactly what our soul was. And then we started paying attention to this life that's happening around us more often, and we started covering up and blocking off the beauty and the perfection of our soul, of our truth. With this awakening, all of that is let go, all of that is cleared away, and we have perfect understanding and union with our soul. this restoring is a feeling of cleansing and renewal. It's all inner. It's not something that happens out there. It's all inner. So just feel it. He leadeth me into paths of righteousness for his name's sake was the second part of that line. And this is to follow the pathway of righteousness, which Ernest Holmes tells us that righteousness means right useness. We're using our thoughts, all of everything that we have, we're making right use of it. I love the way he talks, because he when he talks of sin, it's like we've talked about in here before. Sin is just a mistake. It's a mistaken look at something. Righteousness, growing up in the teachings that I grew up in, righteousness was something that we strove for, but it was also something that is like, oh, they think they're more righteous than me, so it became a weapon, almost. Yeah, you think you're more righteous than me? Well, I'll show you. And we get into these battles, these inner battles in our heads. Righteousness, no, this, just to break it down, right useness. It is it's to correct our thinking to align with divine mind is what righteousness is all about. It's not about what we've earned in the spiritual world or in the religious world. It is simply making right use of our mind, of our thinking. It's to align our thoughts with God and be in harmony with God. As we allow the shepherd's righteousness, or righteous path rather, or God's guidance, we are restored, body, mind, and spirit. The next line in the psalm is, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. A lot of people think of the shadow of death as this really, really dark place, and they don't realize that they're in it. They don't realize that they've ever been in it, because they think it's so awful that they think they've kind of steered away from the shadow of death. Shadow of death is simply this material world that we have allowed to seem real, that we have allowed to seem like our truth. That's the shadow of death. It is the mistaken thought that something other than God and our oneness with God is truth. Anything outside of that knowing falls into the shadow of death. We walk through the shadow of death as we perceive life from the material senses. So when we let our touch and our smell and our eyes and our ears, when we let those things dictate to us what is real, what is truth, we're in the shadow, the valley of the shadow of death. God has never forsaken us. So even when we are in that spot, even though when we're letting those senses dictate to us how to live, how to move forward, how to believe, how to whatever, God hasn't forsaken us. God is still with us. And we need only open up, allow, receive. We can't wander away from God, as God is omnipresent. So even in that shadow of death, God's there. If God is infinite, if God is omnipresent, there is nowhere He cannot be. And that is very hard to remember sometimes, especially when the times are bad. Divine will, divine good comes to us all according to our understanding and our experience. So as we understand truth as opposed to the shadow of death, as we understand what truth is, our movement away from the shadow of death becomes more complete. Our understanding opens up, and as our understanding opens, we move further away from the shadow of death. Thy rod and thy staff were the next part of that line. The rod, and here's where things got real confusing for Jesus. Not for Jesus, but for the people around Jesus. The rod and the staff are considered tools that the shepherd used to protect the sheep. Now, if a wolf came up upon those sheep, that shepherd was going to use it as a weapon and take care of that wolf. Jesus came and people knew that the shepherd, and they admitted, they owned up to the fact that Jesus might be our shepherd. He might be our Messiah. And along with the shepherd comes the staff. So they're looking for a warrior to come in and physically run off the Romans, to physically protect them and move them out of slavery, out of bondage. But that staff was misunderstood. The staff was understood to be a weapon, but the staff is actually a symbol of truth, God's truth. Our complete reliance on the use of the law of good is that staff. That staff might have been used as a weapon at one time, but it represented the good and the protection and the peace given to the people that this shepherd looked out over. Jesus was the staff. He gave people the peace. He gave people the good. He gave people the love that were provided by the shepherd. He wasn't a weapon. He was a staff of truth. The next line in this beautiful psalm is, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over." The first part of this line speaks to the gifts of life, including health and happiness and joy and success in living. They're all laid out for us. It's like a feast. This experience, everything that we could possibly need, is already laid out and waits for us to just receive. All we have to do is accept, allow. And isn't that better than having to work your hind end off to get something? Just accept and allow. Receive. Good can be found anywhere. This is where our spiritual understanding, our understanding of truth begins to open. Because the more it opens, the more we know this is true. Good can be found anywhere. If God is omnipresent, that means God is everywhere. And if God is everywhere, good has to be everywhere. If we don't see it, it's not because it's not there. It's because we're blinded in some way and not allowing it. So go into every situation knowing good is there and see how things feel and change and shift for you. Abundance is found everywhere. Peace and joy are found everywhere. The table of God is eternally spread, but if we are too busy to rest and receive, we're not going to realize that truth. The next part of that line was the oil. Thou anointest my head with oil. Oil signifies complete hospitality, a perfect welcome. So imagine this. David is out there tending his flock. He's probably found a nice green patch next to still waters. And he's not only grateful for where he is, he's grateful that God welcomed him perfectly, anointed him, was the host of all of this. It tells you that God laid all this out for us. The perfect host, the perfect hospitality, All of this is laid out for us, and we can go in and we can criticize it and pick it apart, or we can go in and be grateful and look for the good. It's our choice. And then the next part of this line is, my cup runneth over. This speaks to God's limitless abundance. If we want our cup to run over, we got to do two things. And Andy said one of these the other day. I think it was hold it upright instead of upside down. Hold that cup upright so that it can receive. But here's the thing, is a lot of times when we get something in our cup, we want to cover it up, we want to pull it back in and protect it so nobody else can get it. And if we're doing that, it is not running over. We've got to be open. We've got to put our cup out there, let it fill, let it be running over, and let other people know that. Not to go brag. But if somebody happens to see how your cup is running over, don't be embarrassed, don't be shy, don't try to hide it. Because if you do, you cut yourself off. Let them see it. Because if that cup is infinitely running over, even if they take some of it, your cup is still running over. We get so caught up in trying to protect and hide and make things so that we're okay. We don't want others to be bad, but we got to be okay first. We forget that oftentimes the best way to fill our own souls is through giving, is through sharing. Nowhere in the Bible does it say go give everything away and suffer. But Jesus does talk a few times about this stuff's not going to get you there. This stuff will. It's what's in here. So the next line is, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This simply tells us goodness will always be available to us, and there will always be mercy for our mistakes. We don't have to be perfect. We can strive to be perfect, but we don't have to be. There will always be mercy. The presence and goodness, the love and peace of God will never forsake us. And the loving presence of God and the law of good are set as our foundations. It's a pretty good place to be. I challenge you to read this on your own and just think about how this pertains to you. But the thing I take away from all of this is when we open ourselves to understand truth, there can be no wrong, no matter what's happening around us, because our truth is spiritual, and nothing can harm or damage our spiritual truth. So I want to close today with prayer, but I want to ask you to join me in this prayer. I'm going to step right over here so everybody can see the screen. I just want to use this as our prayer today. So let me back out of the way. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. I restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Mercy. And amen.